With American citizenship and American identity on the line, I want to bring in Jose Antonio Vargas. He is the founder of Define American and author of the book, Dear America, Notes of an Undocumented Citizen. Lisa Lerer is national political reporter for the New York Times. And Eddie Glaude is a Princeton University professor. He is author of the book, America, USA, How Race Shadows the Nation's Anniversaries. It is so good to see you all. Lisa, I thought that Stephen Miller was supposed to have been sidelined at the White House, yet he is out front and center right now.
Yeah, it struck me, what really struck me about that compilation of clips was the mention of the midterm elections.
Yes.
And part of what you see from parties always as they head into the midterm elections is an effort to use the court to motivate their base. And I think that's politically part of what's happening here. I think Republicans know they're facing a national political environment that's frankly not the best for them. They know that while, revoking birthright citizenship is broadly unpopular, it is fairly popular among Republican voters. And I think part of this is an attempt to make sure that their base comes out and votes in the midterms, and they're sort of grabbing onto whatever they have amid an unpopular war and a pretty economic climate that people feel pretty unhappy and bleak about.
Jose Antonio Vargas, when you and I were sitting in your living room sort of dreaming up Define American more than a decade ago, you were very clear that this anxiety around identity was central to the conversation we were having about immigration, and that the white nationalism that was lurking in the dark corners would one day come front and center. We are watching that moment
unfold,
right now.
Yes. And I have to say, by the way, it's been fascinating watching the MAGAverse, I love that term, try to pretzel its way into this conversation. I think we have to keep in mind the moment a sitting president went to the Supreme Court to hear the oral arguments, we knew that this was never going the Trump administration was not going to win this, but they wanted this. They wanted to put birthright on the table, so to do exactly what they're doing now, which is to rally their base. I have to say, by the way, I couldn't sleep the night before the ruling, just trying to figure out, just couldn't sleep. And just to remind everybody as we approach July 4th weekend that all of my immigrant friends, people who are children of undocumented immigrants, you're as American as everybody else, and the Supreme Court just validated that. And no amount of Stephen Miller's, I don't even know what to call it, invalidates that fact.
Eddie Glaude, very normal, very cool responses coming from the right in response to this decision. The CEO of The Federalist, MAGA influencer Sean Davis, tweeted what he called ways forward from yesterday's Supreme Court decision. I'm going to read some of them to you, as ugly as they are. He suggests denying entry to all pregnant foreigners, denying entry to all female foreigners, pregnant or not, requiring sterilization of all foreign visitors before they arrive here, and if all of that does not work, dissolve the country entirely. That post on X had 600,000 views as of this morning. History would tell us, Eddie, not to be surprised.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's important for us to widen the aperture here. We want to breathe a sigh of relief, Alicia, that the court upheld the 14th Amendment. But we also need to understand the motivation for this. And we've talked about it in terms of the politics. But we need to understand also that this is part of great replacement. You know, I'll describe what Stephen Miller said. That was racist bile. He's a rabid racist, and we need to just call him for what he is. And so you hear J.D. Vance pursuing this issue. Well, you need to connect what J.D. Vance is saying about birthright citizenship to what he said in 2005 of July 5th, that creed is not enough for American sovereignty. He gave a blood and soil speech. We need to understand the rebranding of what birth tourism is, of what this is all about. Remember, just in 2000, we were confronted with anchor babies, and we thought it was horrific that they were talking in this way. They just simply rebranded that discourse, and now it's mainstreamed. So I think we need to understand what's motivating this and name it for what it is. This, as you rightly say, Alicia, is part of a white nationalist agenda. They believe that this republic must remain a white republic, and this is one of the ways in which they're pursuing that agenda.
I want to bring in MS Now justice and intelligence reporter Ken Delaney. And Ken, after yesterday's ruling, the Department of Justice released a memo targeting what they describe as birth tourism schemes. Tell me about that.
Yeah, that's right. And birth tourism is a thing. There have been various federal cases over the years. By one estimate, 33,000 babies are born to women each year who enter on a tourist visa and then leave the country shortly thereafter. And it's illegal to apply for a tourist visa for the sole purpose of giving birth so that your child can be an American citizen. And I just came from a news conference at the Department of Justice where Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche vowed to crack down on this practice, which he says is widespread. Take a listen.
From a Department of Justice standpoint, it's obviously focusing our prosecutors and our law enforcement partners on birthing tourism, and it's a booming industry, and it will continue. It will continue given the Supreme Court's decision yesterday. There's other things that DHS can do and the federal government can do in the visa process and the application process to try to minimize or limit the opportunity of folks coming here to not to visit and not to do what they're saying they're doing on their tourist visa, but just to have a baby that can then be a U.S. citizen.
And again, there have been a handful of federal investigations and federal prosecutions in the last, say, 5 years regarding alleged birth tourism rings, but it hasn't been a major federal law enforcement priority. Clearly, this administration wants to change that as they are changing a whole host of things that the Justice Department is doing. Alicia.
Lisa, I wanted to bring in Ken's reporting because you have the action inside DOJ. You have Congresswoman Nancy Mace calling for Justice Amy Coney Barrett to be impeached. You have Speaker Mike Johnson reacting like this. Let's take a listen.
Birthing tourism, a trend where people sure the conclusion from this opinion is going to be that you got to amend the Constitution to fix that. As we all know, it's a big challenge to amend the Constitution. It's only happened 27 times in our whole nation's history, and the reason is because you got to have 2/3 of both chambers of Congress and 3/4 of the states to ratify. It's usually at least a many years long process and very complicated.
Okay, so I have a few questions here. One is it your sense that they actually think that any of this is feasible, or is this all about court of public opinion? And even if it's court of public opinion, who is in that public? I mean, I get that their base is motivated by this. Who else cares?
Well, I think it's largely their base, right? Like it is so striking to me because the court has actually been more favorable to the administration than most other courts have been to past presidents. The New York Times had a chart today saying over 60% of the decisions had sort of sided with where the administration wanted them to be, which is significantly more like a high for recent presidents. So it is interesting that they're seizing on this one. Right. And I think the reasons that, you were referencing earlier are part of it, that it's about this fear among their base that white, conservative Americans are losing their place in the national project. And that larger idea, I think, is very motivating to a certain subset of Republican voters and particularly MAGA voters. It's a pretty fundamental piece that's intertwined with Trump's whole rise and the rise of that whole movement. And I think at a time when more broadly Americans feel that many things are not going well, right? And there are concerns, as I said, about the economy, about the war, about even, you see it in some polling, the idea that the administration may be enriching themselves. Finding ways to return to that core message is something that I think some Republicans feel could be valuable as a political message.
I just think it's important contextually to your point. Depending on who's counting, there's about 50 million immigrants in this country. That's 15% of the population. That is the highest number of immigrant and percentage this country has ever had. So that's the context, right? I think we have to understand that. The country is changing. The country is going to be more Latino, more Asian, more black, and more mixed race. Right. That's not DEI. That's just reality. And the reality is, I think Fox News ought to make sure that they're running how amendments are actually, what it takes. What is it? 38 of the 50 states need to ratify an amendment. 2/3 of the House. This Congress can't even get its job done, much less try to amend the Constitution.
Eddie, I want you to take a listen to what Congressman Jamie Raskin had to say about the way forward.
J.D. Vance made it clear they see this as a 5-4 decision and one that's a sitting duck for further mega Republican Federalist Society-style organizing. And if they could just get one more seat on the court, then they'd be able to flip it over with the right federal statute. Chip Roy showed up in the Judiciary Committee right after the opinion was handed down and said, we're going to fight this and we're going to pass a law to make this happen. So I think that's very much on the agenda.
Eddie, what does it tell you that this is their priority?
Just as the previous guest noted, that this is red meat for their base. This is a way to stoke the culture wars. And let's just be clear. You had 4 justices side with Justice Cheney. And Taney, Justice Taney. They agreed with the logic of the 1857 Dred Scott decision. That's how they were imagining citizenship in this country. And I just want us to kind of really wrap our minds around this. I understand we have to talk about it within the context of politics, but we need to understand the implication of a major political party mobilizing around challenging birthright citizenship and what that actually suggests that they believe in.